via Virgine cadete.
Sacrosanctum Concilium, Chapter 1, Part 2. The Promotion of Liturgical Instruction and Active Participation. Paragraph 14. Mother Church earnestly desires that all the faithful should be led to that fully conscious and active participation in liturgical celebrations which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. Such participation by the Christian people as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a redeemed people, is their right and duty by reason of their baptism. In the restoration and promotion of the sacred liturgy, this full and active participation by all the people is the aim to be considered before all else. For it is the primary and indispensable source from which the faithful are to derive the true Christian spirit, and therefore pastors of souls must zealously strive to achieve it, by means of the necessary instruction in all their pastoral work. Yet it would be futile to entertain any hopes of realizing this unless the pastors themselves, in the first place, become thoroughly imbued with the spirit and power of the liturgy, and undertake to give instruction about it. A prime need, therefore, is that attention be directed, first of all, to the liturgical instruction of the clergy. Wherefore the Sacred Council has decided to enact as follows. Professors who are appointed to teach liturgy in seminaries, religious houses of study, and theological faculties must be properly trained for their work in institutes which specialize in this subject. The study of sacred liturgy is to be ranked among the compulsory and major courses in seminaries and religious houses of studies. In theological faculties, it is to rank among the principal courses. It is to be taught under its theological, historical, spiritual, pastoral, and juridical aspects. Moreover, other professors, while striving to expound the mystery of Christ and the history of salvation from the angle proper to each of their own subjects, must nevertheless do so in a way which will clearly bring out the connection between their subjects and the liturgy, as also the unity which underlies all priestly training. This consideration is especially important for professors of dogmatic, spiritual, and pastoral theology, and for those of Holy Scripture. In seminaries and houses of religious, clerics shall be given a liturgical formation in their spiritual life. For this they will need proper direction, so that they may be able to understand the sacred rites and take part in them wholeheartedly. And they will also need personally to celebrate the sacred mysteries, as well as popular devotions which are imbued with the spirit of the liturgy. In addition, they must learn how to observe the liturgical laws, so that life in seminaries and houses of religious may be thoroughly influenced by the spirit of the liturgy. Priests, both secular and religious, who are already working in the Lord's vineyard, are to be helped by every suitable means to understand ever more fully what it is they are doing when they perform sacred rites. They are to be aided to live the liturgical life and to share it with the faithful entrusted to their care. With zeal and patience, pastors of souls must promote the liturgical instruction of the faithful, and also their active participation in the liturgy both internally and externally, taking into account their age and condition, their way of life, and standard of religious culture. By so doing, pastors will be fulfilling one of the chief duties of a faithful dispenser of the mysteries of God, and in this matter they must lead their flock not only in word, but also by example. Transmissions of the sacred rites by radio and television shall be done with direction and dignity, under the leadership and direction of a suitable person appointed for this office by the bishops. This is especially important when the service to be broadcast is the Mass. Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today we are covering the second part of the first chapter of Sacrosanctum Concilium. I'm joined again with Dan. Dan, thank you for joining us. All right, and so this chapter is really focusing on what active participation actually means among the laity, as well as formation of the clergy, which uses some interesting language here. I actually particularly like the 14th paragraph here, where it uses the terminology of a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a redeemed people. Kind of reminds me a little bit of some Old Testament language referring back to the Israelites. Uh, did you have anything you wanted to say about that, Dan?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that it does tie to the role of the church as the continuation of Israel. And in addition to that, the fact that this, royal priesthood, holy nation, redeemed people is brought up in the context that participation in the liturgy is the right and duty of Christians, right? So we are entitled to it as baptized Christians, but we also have a duty to partake in it. And I guess there's a connection we can draw just initially with the right and duty the Israelites had to following the covenant at Mount Sinai, right? As being an Israelite, they both had a right to partake in the life of the people of Israel. They are part of this unique union with God. So they have the right to have like, that unique area of being the firstborn nation, that unique area where God is loving them in a way that is set aside different from the other nations, but at the same time, they have their duties to fulfill in obeying the Ten Commandments, following the prescripts of God, not committing idolatry, that sort of thing. So we kind of see this continue, and liturgy takes this very important role in Christianity.
And when it refers to that piece, some of these paragraphs are talking about what that's going to look like moving forward. So it made me think of this question, raises the question in my head, full participation, uh, the duties of teachers, spiritual directions for seminarians. Were these things going on before the Second Vatican Council?
Well, I'm sure these things were going on before the Second Vatican Council. Now, this is an area where we touch into history, and obviously there's a lot happening. The Catholic Church is indeed Catholic, which means that there are a lot of different contexts by which this is coming on from different countries, different cultures, where formation will be different. Some of the factors we see leading up to Vatican II, obviously, we see the end of World War II, a great desire in the world as a whole, but especially in the West for peace. Moving into a Cold War, a fear of nuclear war is also very prevalent here, as well as moving into a world where information is much more known, right? And there was
Mhm.
definitely in the late 19th century, early 20th century, a concept that was intellectualism averse or averse to rationalism. This is probably more strongly noted in Protestant circles, but this affected all of religious circles as well. The idea of that faith and science debate, where faith and science are somehow inherently fighting against each other, was very present within many areas of Catholicism as well as Protestantism in the US. And I think that led to a decrease in the rigidity and structure of seminary teaching in that time. But obviously, Vatican II, in the section 14, they're looking for restoration and promotion of sacred liturgy. I really think they're trying to bring back the education and the intensity of it to the priesthood. It's not trying to introduce something new.
The word clericalism gets thrown around a lot these days. How exactly would you define it, Dan? And then we can like build off of that.
Yeah, and like we talked about before we did, I won't try to give too strong a definition, but I think it's the using of one's power as a priest or ordained minister, whether deacon, priest, or bishop, beyond what that power should give oneself, right? So maybe a priest acting like he is already a saint, or even acting like he is God, um, treating other people like they're supposed to, you know, be his servants, be people who look towards him, living as a king and as sort of a monarch, in his parish rather than living as a servant, right, of his sheep that he is hopefully trying to guide towards their salvation, right? So that's one of the big risks. And a lot of ways we see this both starting from the priest side, but also from the um, people who are in Mass, people who are attending, people who are part of the parish that have this huge respect from priests that is perhaps disproportionate, gives a lot of power to the priest, and then obviously bad apples will abuse that power. And that's something that we see in the sex scandals starting to be unearthed in the 50s, although obviously we know it's going to get much worse, throughout the 60s. But we're seeing a lot of these issues starting, obviously the influence of communism, both inside and outside the church, having an impact on how priests use their power and potentially abuse it. But that was a very big concern that I think we see prior to Vatican II, and especially a lot of the folks who are leaders in Vatican II would have had more insight into what the future of priestly formation was looking like and what it should look like than anyone at that time would have had insight to.
And what I think Sacrosanctum Concilium is not saying, to build off what you just said there, is not that priests shouldn't be respected, not that you shouldn't treat your priest as someone in society that is just generally that you should offer your respect to, like a police officer or firefighter. When you're growing up, you're taught these things. It's not saying that that isn't true. What it's saying is that, we really need to emphasize what the liturgy is. And we really need to refocus ourselves on the source and summit of our faith, as it said in the first part of the first chapter in the last video. So I really think that that's what it's going for here.
Yeah, exactly. And just like to go to the document, that last section where they go through, it's really in, I think 17, 18, 19, where they talk about what they actually practically want to institute. It's saying all professors who teach liturgy need to be properly trained. That seems obvious. The study of
Mhm.
sacred liturgy is to be ranked as compulsory. So any seminaries that were not necessarily teaching priests, which is crazy to think about, but if a seminary is not teaching priests anything about sacred liturgy, that's a problem, right? And then obviously they say it needs to be taught under theological, historical, spiritual, and pastoral and juridical lenses, right? Seminaries and houses of religious clerics should be given liturgical formation in their spiritual life. So liturgy is not just for classes, it's also for their spiritual formation. And then what really interests me here is the section where they talk about in 18, where they say priests, both secular and religious, who are already working in the Lord's vineyard, are to be helped by every suitable means to understand ever more fully what they're doing. I'm paraphrasing slightly. But why that's interesting to me is it's almost an acknowledgement of, look, this is where the church is at. We're not making the claim that all priests need to re-enter this education, maybe from practical purposes, for whatever purpose, that's not what they're saying. But they're acknowledging that there is a lack of education that might exist between those priests that are already working in the Lord's vineyard, and we should support them. But the focus of the council seems to be more geared on providing formation for that next generation than trying to, for lack of a better term, fix this generation
Mhm.
in the practical things that it's prescribing.
And you could also argue that the 18th paragraph, which you just mentioned, it's also like a call to arms, I guess you could say it, or a call to greater spiritual devotion to priests that may have grown up in this environment, which was not ideal, which they're now going for, the reinvigoration of the church era that is post-Vatican II. So it could also be argued that, yeah, this is what they're going for here, trying to make these priests who are already here more on fire for the faith. Um, maybe they didn't have the greatest education when they were in seminaries. It is kind of crazy to think that, yes, the individuals who are teaching sacred liturgy need to know sacred liturgy. It's like, well, yeah, if I want to teach astrophysics, I should probably know something about astrophysics, right?
Yes.
Um, and yeah, it's interesting to think that that wasn't necessarily the case moving before the Second Vatican Council. So yeah. Well, was there anything else you wanted to add here, dude?
Did we want to touch on the radio and television bit in verse 20? I think that's the only thing we didn't talk about.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so verse 20 talking about the radio and television and how it should be used to evangelize, of course, but that it should be under the direction of a suitable person appointed by the bishops. So it does say here that it refers explicitly to the sacred rites. I don't know if that is an umbrella term for just talking about theology. I don't think that it is. Um, but that if you wanted to show the mass on television or the mass on radio, I guess, I don't know. But you would need an appointed person to do that, as it were, with the sacred rites, if I'm not mistaken here, right, Dan?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say, I mean, my read is also, because this section is about liturgy, it is about the Mass. So, I mean, obviously it says, especially when it's the Mass, but there are other sacred rites. There are prayers, obviously private devotions that can be
Mhm.
broadcast through the radio and television. And I think that it's talking about those rites versus discussion of theology. I don't think that's even sort of being thought of here. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean I think there is some room for, obeying bishops in terms of any concern over what you say. Obviously, there's a lot of historical precedent for that in the church. But I don't think that this section is touching on Catholic discussion. It's more of those specific rites, which is the focus of the document.
And I think there's great wisdom in not mentioning discussing theology explicitly, because if clericalism were to take over again, well, now you have all these television institutions that are just showing you whatever it is that they want to show you, you know? So I think that there is great wisdom in not showing that in the document here. So faithful Catholics, if you want to call them that, can continue to post things on the internet, can continue to post things on television that are explicitly Catholic and then that aren't run by clerics, so to speak. Um, so yeah, this is the second part of the first chapter of Sacrosanctum Concilium. Uh, any final words, Dan, before we get going here?
No, I think that we covered a lot here, and looking forward to continuing on this journey.
Awesome. Well, yeah, the next part's very interesting. It's about the reform of sacred liturgy, a very hot button topic in our day for sure. But that'll be it for now. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Gaudete, Christus Natus ex Maria Virgine, Gaudete.